Hello, I am Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Monster Hunter collab, but I will not be looking at the hunters in particular. I'm only going to be examining the actual dragons that pop out of the special collab rare machine. The hunters will be done in a separate subsequent posting / video. So, the Monster Hunter collab is one of the more highly anticipated and exciting collabs to come to North America / EU because the top prizes do push the envelope of what it means to be at the top of power creep because they're just simply unbelievably powerful cards. However, with any collaboration, you should actually be looking at what value the lower tier cards can bring you. Is there value or merit in the more common roles possible? Because if there is not, it's going to be very dangerous collab to roll in because it's going to be very expensive from a Magic Stone point of view. Because, like I said, if we look at the rolling rates that are been given on Pad X from this source here, you can see that the 7 stars only have a 3% hit rate chance, and those are the obviously big prizes. The 6 stars are okay, the 5 stars are okay at best as well. So really, this is a very top-heavy collab. And one thing I do want to stress is that Diablo does not actually, you don't actually need to own him in order for you to succeed. You can pair with a friend instead, and I'll explain more why as we go through this video. Furthermore, all rolls in this collab will cost you 10 magic stones per attempt, so you have to view them as twice as expensive as a normal rare machine roll. However, with that being said, all the 5 stars sell for at least 15,000 monster points, so there is at least to a certain extent merit if you want to just acquire monster points in the most fast and efficient way possible, excluding the heroine and the 10 stone Godfist exclusive machine. So as an overview, we saw already before, but there are 2 7 stars, 5 6 stars, and 5 5 stars. However, they're obviously not created equally. Naturally, the 7 stars are obviously in the S tier, and only one of the 6 stars is in A. Most float around B, the rest are in C. So this collab actually is not as amazing value from the lower end rolls point of view because they all float around B's and C's for 10 magic stones per attempt. So it may not be necessarily justifiable to spend all of your magic stones here because when I explain about the 7 stars and what they do, you may not necessarily need to own them. Now, I'm just going to jump right into the 7 stars, and all the 7 stars will sell for 75,000 monster points, but you really should not. They are some of the best cards I've ever seen, so just please don't. So the first 7 star is MaSu, and MaSu is one of the 2 7 stars that can be acquired. They come with an incredible 1,250 weighted stats. That is like the highest in the game. Like, that is incredible. You basically get a free 297 built into the card because all reincarnated cards have 1,000 weighted stats. So this card here already sets the bar higher. Furthermore, you basically want to essentially use them on almost every single team because they provide 9,000 base health. So they're going to push past 10,000 of pluses and stat transfer latents, etc. As well, they own 3 of what I call the Holy Trinity Awakenings. Like, they have the Holy Trinity is guard break, 7 combo, and follow-up attack. And MaSu has 2 7 combos, 1 follow-up attack. So this is just unbelievable amount of value that's built into this one single card because they are able to hit for 4 times damage whenever you are able to achieve 7 or more combos. And if you are making a column of hard orbs, you do 1 damage of follow-up true damage that will instantly kill any resolve boss. So you basically have what will be probably your hardest hitting card, your highest health card, a card that can deal with resolve bosses. Like, what's not to love about this card right here? Furthermore, their active skill does technically not work as well in this current meta because they do make water orbs from dark and heal from wood. So on a lot of the more top tier teams, this is not a beneficial active skill, but they do at least remove locked orb status, so there can be merits there. However, it has an 8 turn base cooldown. So with an 8 turn base cooldown, you are actually able to inherit something somewhat readily over top of them. Now, they do also have they also have a Bind Recover Awakening, which can at least help clear binds from your allies because they are also bind immune. Now, while Amatsu is not a feasible leader, they are pretty much an ideal sub on any combo-based team because of the 7 combo awakenings. But what I want to stress is that even though Kusanagi Hime wants to use healers, Amatsu's 1,250 weighted stats offsets the fact that they're not a healer. Furthermore, that health basically just justifies, like, they'll have more health than any of your healers, even with the healer multiplier. Furthermore, they have the 7 combos, they have the follow-up attack. Like, it's just an incredible card to use on Kusanagi Hime teams. So you would actually want to run them on the more ideal teams because you basically counter all resolve bosses, you have more health, and they actually hit harder than Haku's would outside of TPAs. So they're just an incredible card to own, and if you could pick one card to own from this collab, I would pick Amatsu. Like, if I could magically say I want one card, I want this one. Diablo, I can't say names anymore, but they basically keep the trend of incredible 7-star collab rolls because they are one of the most powerful leaders in the game. And I want to strongly stress that you don't actually need to own him because his ideal teams or pairings does not involve 2 of them. It's himself plus either Anubis or Kusanagi Hime teams. Because they produce a 7x6 board, their leader skill multiplier value is a little lower, but compared to all other 7x6 board leaders, they actually have the highest multiplier. Even dual of them is still a reasonably high multiplier. It's 8.5 times attack by themselves on a 7x6 board, so you could have potentially 14 combos. However, you also do receive 25% damage mitigation when hitting 8 combos, which is very feasible on a bigger board. So you have damage mitigation, which helps you survive preemptives more easily. It kind of acts as a defensive multiplier, but if you pair of Kusanagi Hime and Anubis friends, you are actually able to unleash what is potentially one of the strongest teams in the game. Because not only do you have the damage mitigation, you have the bigger board, so you can always pretty much activate to your maximum multiplier every single turn. And that's a big deal because Kusanagi Hime teams tend to only hit 7 to 8 combos based on a given board. Anubis teams maybe hit 8 or so combos, Skyfalls will help you out a bit more. But with a Diablos pairing, you have pretty much... will at least always have, I don't know what's the minimum number of combos possible on a 7x6 board, but I'm pretty certain that you're going to hit 9 to 10 from a given board. So provided you have enough time extends, enough fingering skills, you will be able to unleash amazing amounts of damage. And even though Diablos has a lower multiplier, the fact that you'll hit the maximum multiplier on leaders who normally don't get to hit their maximum multiplier offsets this. So it's just an incredible card to own. Also, with those massive weighted stats, it helps basically keep your team alive longer because they bring more value. Now, the only downside I can truly foresee from Diablos is their situational active skill. They are able to create a fully enhanced board, like they enhance all orbs, along with providing 25% true damage gravity. Now, true damage gravity allows you to do exactly 25% regardless of when you use it. It's going to do exactly 1/4 of a boss's health, so it could potentially kill them if they were, say, at 15%. You could use it and actually kill them and don't have to actually go through whatever hurdle is done at their 15% threshold. So this is fantastic for dealing with resolve bosses or just bosses with very large amounts of health. You can chunk them down and then gravity them through certain thresholds. However, on the note of resolve bosses, if you have cards with follow-up attack, the need for a gravity or even a true gravity, which is better, is diminished because you don't actually need to use gravities. You can just one-shot them with the column of hard orbs and they die. So in theory, a Diablos leader with, say, Kusanagi Hime or Anubis brings Amatsu as a sub. You have a perfect way to deal with resolve bosses. You technically will have a 6x6 board, so you have 36 orbs remaining plus the 1 combo, more than enough to make sufficient combos. So you are going to have ways to overcome it, and that's the only main drawback I can foresee from him because the active skill is a 24-turn cooldown, situationally valuable, not valuable enough I feel overall, and it's going to be very hard to actually inherit something over top of them. However, it's still an incredible card, and if you are lucky enough to roll him, you are going to make many best friends over the next several weeks. But with that being said, you don't actually need to own him. You can find a friend, you can befriend them, and just reap all the passive benefits from the new and powerful leader. So all 6-star base cards will sell for 50,000 monster points. Again, I highly advise against doing that because they're going to be very rare to acquire. What are the rolling rates? Let's take a look. It's 21%. Like, it's not that high. It's reasonable, but you're more than likely not going to have duplicates unless you get exceptionally lucky or you end up rolling a lot. So Kieran is the best of the 6 stars available because not only do they have 1,100 weighted stats, but they're the 1,100 weighted stats is great, but it's very heavily skewed towards attack. And they don't have any 7 combo or TPA awakening. So it means they're actually not going to be producing that much damage, technically speaking, because they don't have any like awakening to boost that damage to like higher levels. Furthermore, their active skill is a little situational, as well as having their awakenings only restricted to 5. And with only 5 awakenings, it can be very hard to justify using them as a sub, because I'm gonna sneeze. Because the active skill does produce a row of light orbs at the top, which is better than the bottom, along with a turn of haste, but you may not necessarily want that active skill. You may want something more impactful, perhaps. Some people might like it, so you may want to use it maybe as an inherit or a sub, but I feel like it's a bit awkward at this point in time because light row teams are not very predominant at the moment. But the main thing the reason why Kieran is ranked high is because they basically function like a light Mary. And that is because they have a tremendously high recovery multiplier, no skyfalls, and they achieve their damage output by connecting light orbs. So there are some major downsides to Kieran. The main downside is there's only 1 row awakening, so they obviously have much lower passive damage compared to Mary with a single row. Furthermore, Kieran actually has a much lower multiplier of 6 connected orbs. They only hit 56 times damage, which is not very great, to be honest. Like, 56 is all right, but it may not be sufficient without enough rows to compensate for it, because Mary has 10 rows between the 2 leaders. Kieran has 2, so Mary's hitting significantly harder. Furthermore, I'm getting myself mixed up, but like, yes, it's a lower damage with a single row, but they do at least catch up to 126 times attack with 9 connected light orbs. So with 9 connected light orbs, you're going to blow things up. A row team with 126 times will kill things, but the main issue is, like, with only a single row and 6 light orbs, you may not kill enough encounters, so you might have to stall, which is dangerous, or you may have to pop actives, which is not ideal. So whereas Mary could at least blow up most things with just a single row, Kieran may not, and that is a little problematic in my opinion. However, what Kieran's main saving grace is that they're bind immune, and that was one of Mary's biggest weakness. Mary had to basically overcome binds, overcome skill binds. So Kieran at least takes care of some of that issue because their leaders are bind immune. So I do feel like they're going to be a little underwhelming compared to Mary because they won't be as proficient in terms of like playing them as a traditional leader through end game content, as well as they don't have any full light board you can create for fast farming. So it's going to be good, but it's just a lot weaker than Mary in my opinion. Rathalos also has 1,100 weighted stats, but they only have 5 awakenings, which is kind of the trend of the Monster Hunter collab for the non-7 stars. They have very high weighted stats, but they have lesser awakenings and potentially more awkward to use leader skills or active skills. Now, they do actually have a reasonably powerful active skill. They do produce 6 fire orbs at random while enhancing them all, but mono fire teams tend to want to have, I feel, a more impactful active skill. Now, an average board will give you at least 5 of each element, so in theory, a single orb changer won't produce as many orbs as Rathalos would because it's guaranteed 6. However, Rathalos is not as efficient when used in conjunction with full board changers because when you use a full board changer, say it makes a tricolor board, use something in conjunction, that's going to produce on average 10 orbs, so there's more value there. Furthermore, most other orb changers have additional perks and benefits. Now, there is an enhanced orb component here, but enhancing the orbs has diminishing returns on Krishna teams because Krishna is, I feel, still the strongest mono fire leader at the moment, and they have plenty of orb enhances, so it doesn't actually achieve very much by changing the converting fire orbs into enhanced fire orbs because most of them were enhanced to begin with. Furthermore, something like Sonata already exists, and Sonata, I would rather run Sonata than Rathalos for an active skill inherit. So as a leader, they do provide 43% damage reduction and 6.25 times attack, but you have to match 3 fire combos, which is far too orb hungry for a defensive and tiny offensive multiplier. They do at least achieve 156 times attack when you do a 5 orb 1 enhance, but again, you need to hit the 3 fire combos with 5 orb 1 enhance to get that damage mitigation and the maximum multiplier. So Krishna teams always have their defensive multiplier present. It's actually a higher defensive multiplier, figuratively speaking, than Rathalos. And it's just going to be easier to use because Rathalos is more orb hungry and it's just going to be an awkward leader. So they're a B, but they do at least have merits as a sub at least. Glavinus has, again, very high weighted stats, 1,180, but their main value is going to be that follow-up attack as well as being heavily skewed towards health and the attack stat. Now, right now, presently speaking, follow-up attack does not have very many common cards that can be used on, so any cards that have follow-up attack right now tend to be a little more valuable than they would be if, say, 5 or 6 months down the road when more and more cards start acquiring this new awakening. So his active skill is very geared towards fire cross teams because it does produce a column of fire orbs from the second from the right column. Now, when you spawn orbs in the second from the right column, that's going to be very awkward for forming regular style combos. It's just not as easy as if they were on the very farthest most side. However, for himself as a leader who is a color cross leader, it's very effective because when you have the orbs in the second from the left or right column, you can make that cross much more easily. So it's going to help himself as a leader, but the problem is the active skill, like I said, does produce the column in the wrong spot, but it also provides 2 times attack for dragons and attackers. And that's not even very synergistic for his own team, let alone any other team currently available, because his own attack offensive multiplier is very high to begin with, so you don't actually need the extra damage component. So it basically is just adding excessive turns to the cooldown. So it's just a big drawback overall. Going to be harder to justify its usage as an inherit to get those juicy stat transfer. Because as a leader, Glavinus does use color crosses. They use fire and dark. So in theory, you can have 3 color crosses. And with 3 color crosses, everything should die in this game. But they also have a flat recovery and attack multiplier for dragons and attackers. But because of its dragons and attackers, it's a little restrictive to use overall. But it's very orb hungry as well. And your combo count is going to be lower. So you are going to have obviously issues overcoming combo shields, but you need, generally speaking, 2 crosses to yield sufficient damage to basically kill everything. 2 crosses is kind of overkill. 1 cross you may not kill enough things, but it's just going to be hard to use him as efficiently as a leader. It could be fun, it can have value, but he also doesn't have a very strong 7x6 leader pairing, and that's what color cross leaders tend to like, especially those that use 2 different color crosses. They want the bigger boards to have more space to actually match combos. So I feel like they're just a little awkward to use overall, but they're still a reasonable card. Now we're starting to decline, and Mizzu, I can't say names, but this card here, they have 1,100 weighted stats, so lower than the other 6 stars, but they do place an amazing emphasis on recovery. They have 1,000 base recovery, which is incredible. They have the co-op boost awakening, which means they have 50% more stats. So in theory, in co-op, they have the highest weighted stats. But the problem is, again, it's all weighted towards recovery, and water teams generally have reasonable amounts of recovery, except for maybe, say, Julie teams. So Julie teams in co-op might like this card. The main problem is this creature here does not fit very well in the current meta because their active skill may be unique, but it doesn't really add very much value because their active skill improves your team's recovery by 3 times for 6 turns, along with 6 turns of heal orb skyfalls. So for those 6 turns, you're going to be very hard to kill, provided you actually have hard orbs on the board. However, this is kind of like a stalling style active skill, and a delay or a shield tends to be better in most cases because they have their effect right away. You don't have to rely on hard orbs actually being present. So it's a cool active skill. I like the concept. It's just not going to be executed very well in the current gameplay because, again, delays and shields are going to be stronger for the most part. So it's just awkward to use, and their leadership potential is quite poor. So they're just a C, but again, a unique active skill at least is interesting, so that's why they're not a D, even though I feel like they have quite low value overall. Val Falk has an active skill very similar to Light Cali in that it produces fire, water, wood, light, and dark orbs, along with a 1,000 true damage component. So it's interesting. You do combine a board changer with true damage. However, the absence of hard orbs being generated is going to make them very awkward to use efficiently overall, because even if a rainbow team does not require hard orbs for activation, you want those hard orbs there because you want to deal damage while healing at the same time. And that's why Light Callie is ranked so poorly on my tier list, because without those hard orbs, she can't A, be used on Raw Dragon teams, which are still reasonably strong, but the fact that you can't heal and deal damage is a major drawback. So the true damage component is interesting, but again, where can we use this active skill efficiently? There's no top tier rainbow team that can truly take advantage of this for the most part. Now, as a leader, they are very interesting because they are able to achieve 4 times health and 400 times attack for dragon types when matching fire, water, wood, light, and dark orbs. However, you are going to have exactly 4 seconds to match orbs, and that can be problematic. This is actually tied into the leader skill. It's a time extension nerf. So if you can match 5 combos with only 4 seconds of those 5 specific colors, you're going to be dealing incredible amounts of damage. Like, that's pretty exciting. 400 times is actually a huge amount of damage. And you don't even need to run a full dragon team because you should have enough health to survive most reasonable attacks. But if a few cards are hitting for 400 times, you're probably going to kill most things anyways. But the main downside is obviously the time restriction, but the bigger problem is going to be the lack of recovery. Unless you load up on high recovery subs, but then you may not have enough dragons to compensate. So it's going to be a fun to use leader. It has potential to clear content. It's just going to be very challenging to play as well as challenging to actually survive. So I feel they'll excel well in shorter dungeons without any mechanics where you actually have to stall and grind things out. Now we transition to 5-star bases. They're a little disappointing overall, I feel. They do sell for 15,000 monster points, but again, I wouldn't do so unless you have duplicates. But they also have 1,000 weighted stats, so they do actually have merit for skill inheritance as a stat transfer. So Rathian basically has 1,069 weighted stats. They are able to provide poison damage along with 2 turns of delay on a 12-turn cooldown. So it's combining 2 useful mechanics. They are able to deal with resolve encounters that don't have a status void through both the delay as well as the poison component, because if something has resolve, like say Hino in Arena, you can delay or poison him, in this case both, and if you one-shot him, the delay prevents the 99 turn skill delay, and the poison also would actually kill him, which also prevents the skill delay. So this is a good way to deal with resolve bosses. Obviously, with follow-up attack, resolve bosses are becoming easier and easier, but at least you retain the option to instantly kill off high defense cards with that poison mechanic. Pre-draws become a lot more easy to deal with, but at least you have a delay as a backup later on. So you kill the pre-draws with poison, the active skill comes back up, you can delay one of the later floors in Arena, so there is merit, at least for Raytheon, I feel, overall. And on your mono wood teams as an inherit, it's going to give you a healthy amount of stats because, again, 1,069 is a tremendously high value. But they are going to be a situational inherit for the most part, but it's still a useful one overall. Tigrex or Tigrex, T-Rex with a Tigrex, I don't know. They basically have very high weighted stats, but their active skill is quite questionable because they produce a board of fire, wood, and jammer orbs. Now, I'm not a personal fan of the jammer meta. I don't think it functions very efficiently, but you can't really deny the fact that Fenrir does have the capabilities to clear content. It's just going to be very awkward to use for the most part. Unfortunately, Tigrex doesn't really function well on Fenrir teams, A, because there's no devil typing, and B, because their active skill does not produce light orbs, which is essential for Fenrir teams. So it's going to be awkward to place them anywhere useful, I feel, on jammer meta teams, because Fenrir I feel is the strongest one still. But one thing that I want to stress is that the board changer is obviously to fire, wood, and jammers, but it's only on a 7-turn cooldown, and that is the shortest board changer that produces 3 elements. I'm counting jammers as an element, because with only 7 turns and 3 elements, you are able to actually play around and do interesting things. Most notably, if you want to run Antares or Algeti alongside Tigrex, you are able to produce a 2/3 optimal board every 7 turns, because both of them have 7-turn active skill cooldowns. So with that in mind, you are able to basically pop Tigrex on turn 7, and then Antares Algeti for 2/3 of the primary color, 1/3 of the other color, no jammers in existence. So there is some value there, and that is interesting as well overall. But the main issue is like low cooldown tri-elemental board changer. Nargak, I can't say names. They have a single turn of haste as well as spawning a column of dark orbs on a 7-turn cooldown. So that alone is actually pretty high amount of value. You get haste, you get a guaranteed 5 dark orbs, but the main drawback for this card here is that they produce their dark orbs again in the second from the leftmost column. So again, like I mentioned before, if it's producing the column on the farthest sides, it's much better for combos. In the second one, it's better for heart crosses. Now, Dark Cross teams, the only relevant one at this point in time is Aizen, and this is actually probably his best home because of the high-weighted stats, the water subtyping for recovery, but on other Mono Dark teams, it may be hard to actually justify the usage of them because, again, the active skill is just awkward overall. It doesn't synergize with board changers, so I feel like it's going to be present on Aizen teams, but not much other usage. Now, they do have Guard Break Awakening, but because their subtype color is water, which is very common, it may be hard to still incorporate the Guard Break mechanic of a full rainbow team efficiently, so I feel like they just won't have much usage overall. Furthermore, Aizen teams have enough damage to punch through pre-draws anyways. Gammoth has very heavily stats weighted towards health, which is great because you can survive larger incoming preemptives or certain kill mechanics. However, the problem is their active skill is very lackluster overall. They randomly spawn water, wood, and dark orbs, and that doesn't really do much in this current meta. Like, I think only Karen can truly capitalize on it. Maybe Dark Athenas want a really, really budget orb changer, but it's just not consistent enough to be used on many other teams. There is a 1 turn of delay, but again, Dark Athena teams are probably the most relevant team that wants to use any of those 3 elements, and they already have a delay, so they don't really need to have this. So he's just in an awkward place, but the high-weighted stats, there is a delay, it still keeps him out of the D category. And last but not least, we have Rathalos, and they have 2,699 base attack, along with 3 TPA Awakenings. So they have the potential to hit for incredibly high amounts of damage when you match light TPAs. As well as that, they also have actually a very powerful active skill. They have 2 turns of delay along with 2 turns of enhanced light skyfalls. So this obviously synergizes very well with mono light teams. Unfortunately, mono light teams are not very much in demand right now. Mizzu still technically can clear content, and technically Rathalos with those TPAs would function well on TPA Mizzu teams. However, again, like I said, Mizzu has obviously fallen far from grace. If this card came out 8 months ago, this could have been incredible. TPA Mizzu teams would have had another great hard-hitting option to use, along with a very powerful active skill. But the main problem is Rathalos doesn't have a good home to fit on, and it's just hard to justify their usage. Furthermore, their leadership potential is not really existent, so we just kind of ignore it. So the Monster Hunter collab definitely puts the dragons back into Puzzles and Dragons, because the cards are actually they're very beautifully drawn. Like, it looks ferocious, it looks intimidating, and with MaSu and Diablos, they are just unbelievable cards. Like, they're just incredible. They really outdid themselves, maybe pushed power creep a little too hard, and they also put it behind a collab, so it's even harder to acquire. However, that being said, you don't need to own Diablos to function well, because of the fact that you can pair with a friend with your Kushinada Hime or Anubis. So the only real card you need to own, or if you really had to own one card, is MaSu, who is incredible. But again, this collab actually doesn't have that much value overall because it's very top heavy. 3% chance of 7 stars is not a very good rate when most of the 5 stars are B's and C's. It's just going to be really hard to swallow. So it is an exciting collab. It does have the potential to yield some of the most powerful monsters in the game, but it is a high cost to roll each time, and the rates are not the best. So with that being said, if you wish to roll, it's obviously a gamble, but let me know how much you plan on rolling and which cards are you hoping for and where you plan to use them. I do plan to release a follow-up post and video about the hunters themselves, so that will help guide you which evolution you make for the hunters, which are both a free and a monster point card. So hopefully you all have a fantastic day, and happy puzzling.